What if the cradle of mankind was never a sanctuary, but the first wound the galaxy would learn to fear? The echoes of that wound still tremble across the stars, carried in the prayers of billions who no longer remember why they whisper in the dark. Long before the Imperium was carved in fire, before its cathedrals bled incense into void, there was only the slow, dreadful realization that humanity had already begun its long descent into night. Those first steps were quiet, the hum of dying engines, the flicker of forgotten technologies, the fading light of a civilization that had once dared to believe it could master destiny. And from that twilight, something ancient stirred, as if time itself inhaled, preparing for the age when mankind would demand salvation from a universe that had none to give. Dreams became scars during the age of strife. Worlds once bright fell not with screams, but with the soft, cold silence of abandonment. The warp storms rose like bruises swelling across reality, severing system from system, kin from kin. Starfleets drifted empty, their hulls blooming with frost, their crews reduced to hollow shadows frozen mid-breath. Planetary governors prayed to dead skies. Populations fought over the warmth of memory. Human empires splintered into feudal dust, forgetting the names of their founders. Yet in the deepest darkness, myths began to circulate, the whisper of a wandering figure moving through the ruins of humanity's arrogance, a being untouched by madness, whose gaze carried the weight of forgotten ages. Wherever this shadow passed, the warp quieted, if only for a heartbeat. Survivors told stories of a man too calm for the age he walked through, too silent for a universe drowning in noise. Some swore his eyes held starfields that no longer existed. Others insisted he was carved from grief itself. He made no claims, he wielded no banners. But he saw humanity's corpse-like slumber and refused to let it be its grave. Worlds found order where he stepped, tribes knelt without knowing why, and warlords felt their fury dull as if faced with a truth older than their rage. In the ravaged cradle of Terra, he waited, gathering strength like a patient storm. When the unification wars erupted, they did not begin with speeches or declarations. They began with the sound of thunder rolling across Terra's poisoned skies, as battle lines were drawn between techno-barbarian tyrants and the war-silent figure who now strode with purpose. His armies were not yet legion, but they fought with the precision of inevitability. Blade met flesh, plasma scorched dust into glass, and slowly, the fractured nations of Earth realized they were resisting not a conqueror, but the return of something they had forgotten they once hoped for. The Emperor's rise was not triumphant. It was grim, necessary, and drenched in the knowledge that all of this was only the beginning of the burden he had chosen to bear. From the ashes of Terra came the birth of giants. The Primarchs, 20 children forged with intention, scattered by malice, and pursued by a father who had not yet forgiven himself for the moment they vanished. As the warp swallowed them, the galaxy shifted. Entire worlds warped in character, as if reshaped by the presence of these nascent demigods. Some became bastions of discipline, others crucibles of violence, others still temples of forbidden genius. When the Emperor finally set forth to reclaim them, he did not find sons raised in his image. He found echoes, reflections distorted by circumstance, each carrying a shard of his design and a fracture of his failure. Yet he welcomed them, each reunion a brief moment of warmth in an age steadily cooling. The Great Crusade roared across the stars like a wildfire seeking purpose. Planets long lost to isolation opened their gates to the lightning-clad warriors of the legions. Machine worlds, fortress moons, hive sprawls etched into the bones of dead titans, all were brought beneath the eagle's shadow. But conquest was only a surface act. Beneath it simmered a deeper truth. Humanity was relearning what it meant to exist in a cosmos where every star harbored the potential for horror. The legions fought not merely Xenos and heretics, but silence, superstition, and despair. Victory was measured not in banners raised, but in the fragile hope that perhaps, just perhaps, unity might hold. But unity carries weight. And that weight grew heavier as the Emperor's gaze shifted toward a secret project deep beneath the palace, a work upon which he pinned the entire species' survival. The Primarchs sensed distance where once there had been unbroken purpose. Whispers festered. Some sons believed their father withheld truth. Others believed he withheld trust. Horus, brightest among them, bore the burden of command with the grace of a chosen heir, yet even he felt the cold edge of abandonment creeping into his thoughts. The galaxy celebrated victories while the seeds of doubt took root in the cracks of loyalty. As the Imperium's reach expanded, so too did the shadows cast by its ambition. Compliance turned to resentment in certain worlds, faith faltered where promises were slow to manifest, and the machine cults of Mars whispered litanies that blurred reverence with hunger. Chain's words roared in the dark where diplomacy failed, and the Emperor's dream began to look less like salvation and more like domination painted in gold. Still, humanity pressed forward, driven by belief, fear, and the quiet hope that the worst was behind them. But the warp, ever patient, watched the empires rise with a predator's amusement. In the quiet void between campaigns, a strange stillness settled, the kind that precedes calamity. Reports whispered of anomalies, fleets lost without trace, psychers seized by visions of a bleeding throne, shadowy entities pressing against reality's thin membrane. Navigators wept without understanding why. Astropaths screamed prophecies before their minds burned out like dying stars. Something was shifting behind the veil, something vast and foul, drawn by the Imperium's incandescent pride. And in that growing pressure, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath, unaware that history was bending toward a fracture no mortal eye could perceive. On a distant world prepared for compliance, a discovery was made. Beneath the ruins of an ancient civilization, Space Marines uncovered a chamber sealed since the dawn of human memory. The walls were carved with symbols no one recognized, but which felt disturbingly familiar, as though echoing something half-remembered from the species' dreamless infancy. At the chamber's center stood a throne of black stone, cracked as if something had torn its way free ages ago. The moment the torchlight touched its surface, the air trembled, and across the Imperium, a dozen psychers collapsed, whispering the same phrase, "He has awoken again." No one knew what it meant. As the legionaries reported their findings, the chamber began to shudder, dust falling like ancient snow. Or perhaps it wasn't dust at all. Perhaps it was ash from something long dead, stirred by their intrusion. A low vibration passed through the rock, as though the planet itself exhaled after millennia of holding a secret too tightly. Instruments crackled with static. The last Vox message sent before contact was lost spoke of a faint heartbeat echoing through the stone, steady and impossibly old. The Imperium dismissed it as malfunction, superstition, or fear. Yet the Emperor paused when he heard the report, his calm mask flickering, not with doubt, but recognition. And somewhere in the dark beneath that forgotten world, something listened and smiled. The chamber's heartbeat echoed long after the last Vox message had faded, rippling outward like a forbidden omen. Across the Imperium, commanders felt a pressure behind the eyes, a subtle tightening of breath, as though the universe itself was bracing for something nameless. On the bridge of a strike cruiser drifting toward its next compliance, a junior officer paused mid-sentence, sensing a wrongness he could not articulate. He stared at the hololithic map as if expecting stars to shift. "Sir," he whispered, "something's moving out there." His commander dismissed it. Stress, warp echo, imagination. Yet in the quiet recesses of the ship, beneath iron floors and humming conduits, the ship's chapel candles flickered sideways, bending towards some unseen gravity. The chaplain watched in silence. Candles did not lie. And faith, true faith, trembled only when something ancient brushed reality's veil. Word of the chamber's awakening spread in hushed, unofficial murmurs, reaching even the grim halls of the Scholastica Sicana. There, amid visions of burning thrones and bleeding constellations, a seer known only as Liana woke screaming. Her voice carried fractures of prophecy, each one jagged and malformed. Students gathered at her bedside, unable to look away from her convulsing form. "He knows you looked," she gasped, eyes rolled white. "He remembers the sons who never were." When instructors attempted to calm her, she did not resist. She simply whispered, "The stone remembers," and died. The report never reached the upper echelons. It was buried beneath bureaucratic ash. But a single acolyte who heard her last words repeated them aloud that night, to no one and nothing. And something in the walls answered with a pulse. On the distant world of Velis Prime, the 44th Cadian stood in formation beneath storm-churned skies, unaware they were marching toward a truth older than their regimental creed. Sergeant Karsten felt it first, a flicker of unease threading through the wind, a sensation like being watched by something that did not blink. Velis Prime was meant to be compliant, loyal, steady. Yet the civilians watched the Imperial Guard with hollow resignation, not allegiance. Their eyes tracked the soldiers not with fear, but disappointment, as though the Imperium had arrived too late to matter. Karsten brushed past a shrine carved into the rock, a shrine older than Imperial occupation. Its symbols matched nothing in any catechism he'd been taught. A small child placing flowers at its base whispered, "He left us once. He won't leave again." Karsten marched on, trying to forget those words. Far above Velis Prime, aboard the flagship of the Sector Fleet, Lord Admiral Vesk convened a war council. Projected images of the newly discovered chamber glowed in the dim light, casting warped shadows across the table. Mechanicus representatives argued over its geological impossibility. Inquisitorial envoys silently took notes, their eyes calculating. "This is not a relic of mankind," intoned Magos Rix, his voice layered with digital echoes. "Nor is it Xenos. It is familiar yet alien. Purpose unknown. Origin unacceptable." At the far end, a lone Inquisitor raised her eyes. "Purpose is irrelevant," she murmured. "Intent matters." When asked what she meant, she only said, "If something broke free once, it can break free again." Vesk dismissed the council shortly after, yet as he returned to his quarters, he felt an unshakable sense that the Imperium had misread the shape of its own shadow. Deep in the Basilica of St. Marith, the Ecclesiarchy prepared a lycanic response to the emerging rumors. The High Confessor, a towering figure in blood-red vestments, preached that the chamber's unveiling was a divine sign, proof that the Emperor's light was stirring some ancient truth from slumber. But not all priests agreed. Brother Esherin, a quiet confessor known for his contemplative sermons, sensed danger rather than revelation. He stood before the basilica's eternal flame and watched it gutter unnaturally. "Faith is a blade," he whispered, "and blades can be turned in the hand of the wielder." In the stillness of the sanctuary, he felt a presence move behind him, not divine, not holy, but inquisitive. He did not turn. He only breathed. "We are not the only ones praying," and the flame dimmed as though something had inhaled. The Astartes of the Iron Phalanx chapter descended upon the excavation site where the chamber had been found. Their captain, Varden, strode through the ruins with measured steps, his armor whispering scripture-level warnings through internal vox runes. Marines reported sensations of déjà vu, as if they had walked these halls before in dreams forged long before their gene seed awoke. At the heart of the site, Varden felt a vibration through the ground, steady, patient, almost like a distant rhythmic footfall. His librarian approached, helm removed, sweat beating across his temple. "There is a will here," he muttered. "Not sentient, but remembering." Something was caged beneath this world. Varden placed his gauntlet on the cracked black throne at the chamber's center. For a moment, he saw a silhouette seated there, tall, regal, crowned in shadow. When he blinked, it was gone. But the air remained warm. On Velis Prime's surface, night fell too quickly. Karsten stood watch on the outskirts of the main settlement, listening to the low hum of machinery and the distant rustle of sand. The world felt as though it were holding its breath. Civilians gathered in the streets, whispering prayers in a language no Imperial translator recognized. Then, without warning, every settlement light flickered out. The darkness was total, oppressive, intelligent. The soldiers activated lamps, but the beams seemed swallowed before reaching the ground. From the blackness came a sound like stone grinding against stone. Karsten tightened his grip on his laskin. A nearby child's voice broke through the silence. "He wakes when we're afraid." Karsten spun toward the sound. No one was there, only footsteps in the sand retreating. Or approaching. Within the Imperial command bunker, alarms blared as Auspex systems detected seismic disturbances radiating outward from the excavation site. Admiral Vesk demanded explanations, but the Mechanicus had none. "The planet is resonating," Rick said flatly. Not shaking, resonating, as though responding to a frequency not produced by any material means. Vox channels sputtered with interference. Some carried fragments of voices. Others carried breathing. The Inquisitor listened closely, frowning as she recognized a pattern. "This is not a natural reaction," she whispered. "It's communication." When questioned, she only replied, "The chamber did not awaken." It was awakened. At that moment, the bunker doors shook violently, once, twice, 3 times, as though something massive had struck the earth above with deliberate force. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the breathing on the Vox grew louder. The Ecclesiarchy declared Velis Prime a site of miraculous significance, deploying missionaries to stabilize local belief. Brother Eshrin joined the pilgrimage, compelled by dread rather than duty. Upon arrival, he knelt in the sand and felt the faint, rhythmic pulse beneath the soil, like a heartbeat shared by the planet itself. The child from before approached him, silent, solemn. She offered him a carved stone symbol identical to those in the ancient chamber. "He remembers his throne," she said softly. Esrin trembled. "Who?" She smiled with pity no child should possess. "The one before the Emperor." Esrin's blood froze. "There is no one before him." The child shook her head. "That is the first lie you learned." When he looked up in horror, she was gone, leaving only the symbol, warm to the touch, as though freshly carved. Everything changed at dawn. The sky split open with a thunderless crack, revealing not light but void, a wound carved across the heavens. Civilians dropped to their knees, chanting the name they refused to translate. Soldiers raised weapons, though there was nothing to shoot. From the direction of the excavation site, a column of black dust rose, swirling upward like a reversed funeral pyre. And through the dust marched figures, human-shaped but wrong. Their silhouettes flickered between forms, as though reality could not decide what they were. Captain Varden and his Astartes charged forward, firing disciplined volleys, but the figures did not fall. Bullets passed through as though hitting shadows cast by something not present. Varden realized with a cold dread that these were not beings, but memories manifest. The chamber had not released a prisoner. It had released a history that refused to stay forgotten. And at the heart of the swirling dust, a second throne emerged, not of stone this time, but of shimmering black light, forming and breaking apart with every breath. Upon it sat a figure, indistinct, blurred by time. Yet every soldier, priest, and commander felt an instinctive, primal recognition. Something older than the Imperium had opened its eyes. And as the ground trembled with a pulse not its own, a single thought echoed across every mind touched by the awakening. The Emperor was not the first to rule mankind. The figure upon the throne of black light did not speak, yet its presence rippled through every soul like a forgotten memory resurfacing with violent clarity. Captain Varden felt his heart stutter as a tremor of recognition stabbed through his mind. Not knowledge, but instinct, as though something buried deep within his gene seed strained toward the figure with reverence it should not possess. Around him, warriors faltered mid-stride, unsure whether to fire or fall to their knees. The air thickened, warm and suffocating, as if the world itself leaned closer to hear an unspoken command. But then came the silence, sudden and crushing, heavier than any roar of battle. a stillness so absolute that even the dust seemed frozen. In that moment, every pilgrim, soldier, and psyker felt the same dread. This was not an intrusion. It was a return. The first screams came from the psykers orbiting Volus Prime. Their minds cracked open like eggshells under the weight of a truth not meant for mortal comprehension. Visions flooded them, not of war, not of heresy, but of a man walking alone across a dead earth long before the Imperium's birth, his shadow stretching across ages. They saw the Emperor kneeling before another figure hidden in starlight, a figure whose eyes glowed with ancient authority. They saw agreements sealed in bloodless silence, destinies divided long before humanity learned to name its gods. And when the psykers tried to speak these visions, their tongues melted into light, their bodies collapsing into ash that drifted through the ship corridors like gray snow. The surviving crew whispered in terror that the warp itself was fleeing from something older than its own madness. On Volus Prime's shattered plains, Sergeant Karsten gathered his squad amid flickering lights and trembling earth. His men were veterans, hardened, unshakable, yet their eyes darted to the shifting skyline with naked fear. Shadows twisted unnaturally, silhouettes forming and dissolving like memories struggling to take shape. A distant chant rose from the civilians, rhythmic, harmonious, terrifying in its devotion. The words meant nothing, but their cadence resonated in Karsten's bones, dragging him toward a truth his training forbade him to consider. One of his troopers clutched his head, gasping, "Sarge." "I saw him, not the Emperor. Someone else. Someone." Waiting, Karsten steadied him, but he uttered no reassurances. Because he too felt a pull, not of allegiance, but of inevitability. Lord Admiral Vesk watched the planet convulse from orbit, the spreading distortion forming a perfect circle around the excavation site. It was not chaos energy, nor was it a natural phenomenon. It was organized, responsive, intelligent. Reports flooded the command deck, planetary vox going silent, entire regiments disappearing from auspex, civilians gathering in ritualistic patterns as if guided by an unseen conductor. The Inquisitor stood at Vesk's side, her face pale yet resolute. "This is not rebellion," she whispered. "This is recognition." Vesk scowled. "Recognition of what?" The Inquisitor finally turned to him. "Of a sovereign older than our Imperium." Before he could respond, every instrument aboard the ship flickered, replacing data streams with a single pulsing symbol, the throne-carved sigil from the chamber. It throbbed like a heartbeat. Brother Eshran knelt in the dust, the child's carved symbol heavy in his trembling hands. Around him, the Ecclesiarchy's missionaries shouted litanies that evaporated into nothing. Their words held no power here. Faith felt thin, fragile, like parchment exposed to flame. Eshran heard the civilians chanting a name with devotion that bordered on despair, their voices weaving into a tapestry of conviction far older than the Lectitio Divinitatis. He stared at the symbol and felt his faith fracture along hairline cracks. The Emperor was his light, his truth. Yet standing here, he sensed a deeper gravity pulling at his soul, a memory too ancient to be dismissed as heresy. "Who are you?" he whispered into the wind. The ground beneath him vibrated in response, a gentle, almost protective pulse. And for the first time, Eshran feared the answer. Captain Varden and his iron phalanx advanced toward the throne of black light, their steps heavy, their breaths strained. The closer they came, the more reality warped, not violently, but gently, like water rippling around a submerged presence. The figure upon the throne shifted, its outline resolving into something unmistakably human, yet impossibly old. Varden's librarian gasped, dropping to his knees. "This is no god," he whispered. "This is the blueprint." Varden froze. "Explain." The librarian looked up, tears streaking his dusty face. "Before Primarchs, before Geneseed, before the Emperor shaped his legions, there was another design, another lineage. We are imperfect copies." Varden's hearts thundered in denial, but deep within, something in his engineered blood shivered in acknowledgement. In the command bunker, seismic alarms escalated into a deafening chorus. The planet's crust split open in precise geometric lines, forming sigils so vast they could be seen from orbit. Magos Rix observed in awe and terror. "This is not tectonic," he stammered. "This is controlled excavation. The world is shedding layers." Through the fissures rose structures, monoliths of obsidian and gold, older than human civilization, each bearing the same throne mark etched within. The Inquisitor's voice shook. "Vilas Prime is not a planet. It is a tomb." When Vesk demanded to know whose tomb, she answered without hesitation. "The one the Emperor sought to bury. The one he feared." A cold dread swept through the bunker as the power grid failed entirely, plunging them into absolute darkness. Sergeant Karsten led his squad toward the rising monoliths, guided by the distant glow of the throne light. The chanting swelled, echoing from every direction, disorienting in its harmony. Shadows thickened into forms, translucent soldiers clad in armor from forgotten epics, marching alongside Karsten's men in parallel columns, not ghosts, not illusions, echoes. One of the apparitions turned its head, meeting Karsten's gaze with hollow ancient eyes. "We fought for him before," it murmured in a voice of crumbling stone. "And we will fight for him again." Karsten stumbled back, heart pounding. "Who?" he demanded. The apparition raised a spectral hand toward the throne. "The first, the true." And then it dissolved, leaving only cold air and the ringing of truth that no soldier wanted to hear. As the monoliths rose, Brother Eshrin witnessed the civilians fall into perfect unity, their voices merging into a single resonant command. The ground pulsed beneath them, responding like flesh touched by familiar hands. Eshrin clutched the carved symbol, realizing it matched the geometric patterns spreading across the planet. Every line pointed toward the throne, toward the one seated there. He raised the symbol, and for a moment, darkness parted around him like a curtain. He saw visions, another age, another humanity kneeling before a ruler whose face was obscured, whose presence dwarfed even the Emperor. And behind that ruler stood the Emperor himself, silent, watchful, subordinate. Eshrin fell to his knees, weeping. "Holy Emperor, what have you hidden from us?" The symbol burned in his hand, searing a new sigil into his flesh. The throne of black light brightened, its radiance shifting from shadow to blinding brilliance. The figure rose, slow, deliberate, monumental, and with its movement, the world trembled. Captain Varden felt something break within him, a psychic snap like a chain pulled too tight. His vision swam. For a heartbeat, he saw not Velas Prime but Terra, ancient, primal, untouched by the Imperium. He saw the Emperor standing before this figure, not as master, but as disciple. The realization struck like a bolt. The Emperor did not create humanity's destiny. He inherited it, and the one who forged that destiny had returned. As the figure's full form materialized, 10,000 voices, civilian, soldier, psyker, priest, uttered the same word in unison, a name buried in humanity's earliest memory. A name that shattered the foundation of imperial truth. And as that name echoed across Vilas Prime, the Emperor himself, far away upon the golden throne, briefly opened his eyes. The Emperor's eyes had opened for less than a heartbeat, yet across the galaxy the effect rippled like a blade dragged across the fabric of fate. On Vilas Prime, the air thickened as though the world itself anticipated a reckoning. The figure before the black throne did not move, yet its presence swelled, expanding into every crevice of the planet's wounded crust. Captain Varden felt his armor constrict as if the Ceramite recognized a superior sovereign. His breath came ragged, each inhalation sharp with metallic tang. Around him, his Astartes faltered, warriors engineered to defy gods, now trembling before a history they had never known they served. The figure's shadow stretched across them, brushing their visors like a command whispered before language existed. For a moment, Varden felt as small as the dust beneath his boots. And yet, defiance flared in him like a stubborn star, tiny but unyielding. Sergeant Karsten's squad advanced through the rising dust, formation broken, morale splintered. The spectral echoes marched beside them again, no longer faint illusions, but solid forms bearing weapons shaped of obsidian memory. Karsten stared at one apparition whose armor bore marks older than any Imperial heraldry. "Why help us?" he asked, voice trembling. The figure did not turn, but its answer came like a distant drumbeat. "We do not help you, we reclaim what was lost." Karsten's gut twisted. He felt loyalty tearing in opposite directions. The Emperor, the Imperium, the truth awakening beneath his feet. The earth vibrated again, a deep, resonant pulse that made his teeth rattle. Something beneath them was rising, something colossal. The squad braced instinctively, though none knew what they expected to fight, the enemy before them or the truth behind them. Within the command bunker, Admiral Vesk watched Auspex screens dissolve into chaos as planetary signatures shifted. Topography changed in real time, plains rising into sharp ridges, valleys collapsing into chasms as though Velis Prime were reconfiguring itself according to forgotten blueprints. Magos Rix sputtered binary disbelief while his mechadendrites spasmed uncontrollably. "This world rewrites itself," he managed. "Not terraforming, remembering." The Inquisitor stood silent, eyes fixed on the void where Data had been. Her voice emerged as a whisper of dread. The Emperor opened his eyes because he recognized the one who returns. Vesk clenched his jaw. "Then we stand ready to face whatever this is." She finally turned to him, expression hollow. "Admiral, you cannot face a myth that predates humanity's first breath." Before Vesk could reply, the bunker lights died, plunging them into freezing dark as the planet's heartbeat thundered beneath their boots. Among the ecclesiarchy, panic replaced dogma. Brother Escharin clutched his burned hand to his chest, the seared sigil glowing faintly through his gloves. The missionaries surrounding him chanted louder, trying to drown out the civilians' ever-rising hymn. But the Emperor's scripture felt thin here, brittle as if recited in a tongue meant for a younger universe. Escharin looked up at the towering monoliths rising around them, each inscribed with the sigil now etched into his flesh. Fear and awe warred inside him. "If this is heresy," he murmured, "then it is older than sin." A missionary grabbed his arm, screaming for him to rebuke the idolaters. But Escharin saw something in the civilian's eyes he had not seen in years. Certainty. Not blind faith, but recognition. "We have worshipped a fragment," he whispered. "And fragments can be broken." Captain Varden pushed forward with his iron phalanx, forcing his mind into discipline as alien memories clawed at its edges. The figure near the throne now glowed with a pallid luminance, its outline clearer, its presence heavier. As Varden stared, he felt a memory not his own. Legions of warriors kneeling, armor of impossible craftsmanship gleaming beneath a sky now lost to time. Not Astartes, something greater, something unblemished. The librarian staggered, clutching his skull as psychic waves pummeled his mind. "He is not a god," the librarian gasped. "He is the one gods feared." Varden felt his entire belief system reel. The Emperor had crafted the legions to be perfection. Yet now, the captain sensed within his bloodline a flaw. Intentional or accidental, he could not tell, but a flaw nonetheless. A reminder that humanity had been reshaped, not created. Above them, the sky cracked open with a soundless scream. Clouds spiraled into a vortex of bruised colors, the atmosphere bleeding light as though reacting to the entity's awakening. Sergeant Karsten saw the heavens twist and felt the ground answering the sky. The monoliths emitted a soft hum, harmonizing with the civilians' chant. Karsten knelt, hands pressed into trembling soil, and whispered a prayer he had not spoken since childhood. But he received no comfort. Only weight, a pressure of cosmic purpose pushing down on him. "What do we do?" A trooper whispered beside him. Karsten could not answer. But the shadow of the throne stretched toward them, and every instinct screamed that whatever emerged next would redefine their loyalty forever. Deep in orbit, The fleet trembled as the Emperor's brief awakening unleashed a psychic shockwave of immeasurable scale. Astartes collapsed in droves, blood seeping from their eyes and ears. Vox communications carried fragments of impossible visions, a battlefield of golden sand, towers of bone rising into distorted suns, a duel between two silhouettes that shattered constellations. Admiral Vesk steadied himself against a railing as he glimpsed, just for an instant, a memory not his own. The Emperor standing before the figure now awakening on Velis Prime, not as ruler but as supplicant. Vesk shouted for the ship's machine spirits to reinforce shielding, but it was pointless. They were witnessing history defy its own written truth, and no armor could protect against that. Eshrin watched the civilians raise their arms as the throne's light intensified, casting silhouettes that stretched like elongated giants across the sands. The monoliths aligned with a grinding resonance, their sigils glowing in pulsing waves. Eshrin felt every beat resonate through his bones. Behind him, missionaries screamed for fire, for purity, for the Emperor's wrath. Yet even their desperation sounded small beside the cosmic litany unfolding. Eshrin's faith wavered on a razor's edge. He lifted the carved symbol, and the light bent toward it like iron drawn to a magnet. "If you are truth," he whispered, "show me purpose." The ground surged, and he knew he had been heard. Not by the Emperor, but by the one who came before. The throne of black light pulsed once, then again, each beat stronger, sharper, more defined. Energy coiled around the rising figure, tearing the air into shreds of fractured luminescence. Captain Varden felt the world tilt as the entity took its first true step forward. The monoliths trembled. The civilians cried out in rapture. The spectral warriors saluted as one. And the sky, already broken, began to bleed. Varden realized with a shuddering clarity that this was not an awakening. This was a reclamation. Humanity's forgotten sovereign was returning to claim what had been stolen, hidden, rewritten. And far away, upon the golden throne, the Emperor's eyes, now fully open, leaked a single tear of molten gold. Time seemed to slow, the world inhaling as if preparing for a scream that would reshape history. The figure turned its head toward the horizon, as though sensing the Emperor's distant gaze. Its form solidified, tall, regal, crowned in shadow and starfire. Every mortal present felt its attention sweep across them like a judge reviewing a long-neglected ledger. And then, as the final monolith locked into place with a seismic crack, the entity spoke a single word, not heard through ears, but carved directly into the soul. Everything trembled, everyone froze, and the galaxy itself leaned closer to listen. The first sound after the cataclysm was not thunder, nor the echo of guns, but breath, a single, ragged exhalation slipping through the ruins like a wounded spirit. From the shattered battlements where Imperial banners burned in silent coils, the survivors stared into an ash-filled horizon that seemed to pulse with the memory of screams. The sky itself felt bruised, as if some celestial hand had struck it in fury. Among the rubble, a chaplain knelt, clutching a rosarius whose glow flickered with unstable faith. He whispered to the dust that once was men, promising that their sacrifice would be remembered, though he no longer believed the Imperium capable of remembering anything without twisting it into another weapon. And somewhere beneath the broken earth, the ripple of something awakening or dying trembled through the stone, too faint for any mortal ear, yet old enough to mark the turning of an age. In the hollowed remains of the command spire, where the air still tasted of ozone and regret, Captain Mailer stood over a table of cracked tactical projectors that flickered like dying stars. His armor was scorched, bearing the scars of choices made in seconds that would haunt generations. Around him, his officers spoke in hushed tones, though no enemy remained within earshot. They debated casualties, supply routes, and the cost of victory, but Mailer heard none of it. His mind replayed the final broadcast from the traitor governor, a confession, a plea, and a revelation spoken in a voice already dissolving in the warp. "We were never alone in this. the man had whispered. And the ones watching, they were patient, Mailer shuddered. Not from fear, but from the certainty that the governor had not lied. Something unseen had guided this betrayal. Something now watching them breathe. Far below, in the infirmary lit by the cold glow of lumen strips, Sister Hospitaller Adrielle moved between the wounded like a drifting prayer. She stitched flesh that could be saved, closed the eyes of those who could not, and murmured fragments of old Terran hymns as if they could soothe souls already traveling beyond reach. The soldiers clung to her voice as if faith itself were bleeding out onto the floor. One guardsman, shaking from shock and trauma, reached for her hand and whispered of a vision seen moments before death touched him, a golden figure turning its face away, abandoning the battlefield as if ashamed. Adrielle held his trembling fingers, urging him to breathe, to focus, but his eyes widened with terror. He was crying, the man rasped. The Emperor was crying. Then he went still. Adrielle froze, torn between holy fury and creeping doubt, for another vision had surfaced tonight when she dared not speak. Outside the infirmary, the remnants of the planet's cathedral lay in ruins, its once mighty spires shattered and strewn across the plaza like bones from a broken titan. Yet amid the devastation, the central statue of the Emperor still stood, cracked, scorched, but eerily intact. Pilgrims and soldiers gathered around it, drawn by fear, faith, or simple need for meaning. A sergeant recited liturgies over the crowd, his voice strained but resolute. But as he spoke, a child crouching near the statue's base screamed, for she had seen something no one else had. A hairline fracture creeping across the Emperor's stone visage, widening like a wound. And within the crack, faint as a dying ember, something glowed, not gold, but red. A sickly pulsing red that seemed to stare back at her. The crowd recoiled, uncertain whether they had witnessed a miracle or an omen of damnation. Night fell with unnatural swiftness, smothering the ruins in a blackness so complete it seemed to swallow sound. Patrols swept the perimeter, their Auspex scanners chiming with false readings that began to repeat in a pattern too deliberate to dismiss. In the center of the devastated district, a squad of stormtroopers descended into a breach torn open by orbital fire. Their boots echoed through labyrinthine tunnels that predated Imperial occupation by centuries. Vox static whispered like distant laughter. When they reached the chamber beneath, they found walls carved with symbols older than any script recognized by the Imperium. Some resembled prayers, others resembled warnings. And in the center lay a sarcophagus of black stone, cold to the touch. The unit commander ordered a withdrawal, but before they could climb the ramp, the sarcophagus exhaled, a gust of air so cold it extinguished their lamps. The darkness was absolute. The screams came after. When the stormtroopers' frantic Vox signals reached Captain Mailer, the command spire erupted into chaos. Officers scrambled. Tech adepts chanted Ben-Huruk countermeasures, and the planetary astropaths clenched their heads in agony as a psychic tremor rippled through the warp, distorting every channel. Mailer himself felt a pressure behind his eyes, like an unseen finger pushing into his skull. He staggered, gripping the railing. Vision swam before him, not memories, but possibilities. He saw stars dying in silence. He saw fleets burning. He saw a sigil he had never studied, carved in darkness. And beneath it, a voice whispered his name, not with malice, but with familiarity, as if it had been waiting for him to listen. When the tremor passed, Mailer exhaled shakily. He knew then the sarcophagus was not a relic, nor a tomb. It was a message, and something inside it had recognized him. In the upper ruins, where the winds howled like grieving spirits, a conclave of surviving priests gathered around a burning brazier. They debated doctrine, prophecy, and the meaning of the catastrophe. Some claimed it was the Emperor testing them. Others insisted it was punishment for hidden sins. A few, their voices trembling, proposed the unthinkable, that this world had been marked long before the Imperium arrived, and the Emperor's light had not illuminated it. It had disturbed it. As their arguments grew heated, The flames of the brazier flared in unnatural shapes, spiraling upward to form momentary silhouettes. Wings, blades, eyes. The priests fell silent, staring. One whispered, "This is no heresy. This is a truth we were forbidden to see." Another slapped him, hissing prayers, but the words felt hollow. For in that moment, every priest knew that faith alone could no longer anchor their world. As dawn crept over the horizon, casting pale light across the battlefield, Sister Adriel returned to the surface, her armor spattered with blood that was not all human. She found Captain Mailer standing alone atop the western ridge, staring at the distant cities that now smoked like dying incense. She approached quietly, sensing the heaviness in his stance. He told her of the sarcophagus, the visions, the voice that knew him. She told him of the guardsman's dying words and the crack in the Emperor's statue that bled red light. Together they stared at the awakening horizon, realizing these were not separate omens, but pieces of a single truth rising like a corpse from a forgotten grave. Adriel asked him what should be done. Mailer did not answer. He only clenched his gauntlet, hearing again the voice whispering from the darkness below, whispering as if guiding him to something inevitable. That night, as the planet groaned under shifting tectonic stress, the sarcophagus broke open. Not with violence, but with a slow, deliberate sigh, as if something inside had stretched for the first time in 1,000 years. Patrols converged too late. The chamber was empty. The walls, once carved with ancient warnings, were now smooth, stripped clean as if devoured by hunger or purpose. Only one thing remained, a trail of crimson footprints leading deeper into the tunnels, each glowing faintly, each shaped not like a human foot but something elongated, deliberate, and disturbingly graceful. The footprints stopped halfway through the passage as if whatever had walked them had simply dissolved into the air. And on the stone where the last print faded, a single phrase appeared, etched by unseen claws. "I return for what was stolen." No one knew what it meant, but Mailer felt the words settle into his bones like prophecy. Across the world, every Vox channel crackled at once, broadcasting a single distorted message. The voice was neither human nor wholly alien, a layered resonance that seemed to speak from inside the listener's mind. "Children of the false throne," it murmured, "your age of ignorance ends tonight." Sirens erupted, defenses activated, pilgrims fled screaming. But amid the chaos, Captain Mailer stood still, the world blurring around him. He recognized the timbre of the voice, the same whisper that had spoken his name in the vision, the same whisper that had guided the traitor governor, the same whisper rising now like a storm. And as the sky split open with unnatural lightning, Mailer understood the truth that clawed at the edges of his sanity. Whatever had awakened beneath this world was not merely an enemy. It was the beginning of something older than the Imperium, older than the Emperor, and it had finally found its way back. The first dawn after the cataclysm rose weakly, as if the sun itself hesitated to cast light upon what remained. Smoke draped the valleys like morning veils, and the world exhaled a long, shuddering breath that carried the weight of all it had witnessed. Captain Mailer stood amid the ruins of the western ridge, boots sinking into ash that had once been cities, armies, faith. The air trembled with an unnatural stillness, one born not from peace but from exhaustion, the galaxy's own heartbeat slowed by grief. He gazed upward, past the drifting embers, into a sky torn open by the final storm. There, the last traces of the spectral presence faded like dying constellations, leaving behind only the echo of its promise to reclaim what was stolen. And as the heavens sealed themselves in pale light, Mailer realized the galaxy would never again feel untouched by that whisper. Down in the shattered basilica, Sister Adriel moved through the sacred hallways like a ghost learning to breathe again. Every step stirred blackened dust that clung to her robes as though seeking absolution. Statues of saints lay toppled, melted, or split clean through, their expressions frozen in the last moment before ruin. At the center, the great effigy of the Emperor still loomed, Yet the crack across his visage had widened during the night, bleeding no crimson now, but something colder, a hollow darkness that revealed nothing at all. Adriel reached out to touch the stone, her fingers trembling. She whispered a prayer she was no longer certain of, asking for strength, for clarity, for forgiveness. The echo returned to her in a way she had not expected, gentle, soft, almost like a lullaby sung by a dying world. She closed her eyes, feeling the truth settle like dust on her skin. Far beneath them, where tunnels twisted into ink-black depth, the place where the sarcophagus had opened lay silent. The ancient walls, once carved with warnings, now reflected nothing but smooth, empty stone. Only the faint imprint of that final message remained, slowly eroding under the weight of the planet's shifting foundations. Vox teams, tech adepts, even psychers combed the passageways in search of further signs. But the presence that had awakened had vanished utterly, leaving no trace but a lingering chill. Some claimed they still heard whispers in the dark, echoes of a voice that resonated through bone rather than air. Others accused them of fear-born delusions. Yet none could deny the way the shadows seemed to breathe when the lamps flickered, or the way their own thoughts sometimes felt like intruders in their minds. Something had moved through this place, and in doing so, had rewritten the silence. On the upper battlements, the surviving regiments gathered for roll call, their once proud ranks reduced to thinned lines of hollow-eyed soldiers who stared at the ground rather than the horizon. Their banners fluttered in the morning wind, torn but still clinging to their poles, emblems of loyalty that now resembled remnants of forgotten promises. The sergeants called out names that would never again answer. Every pause was a memorial. Every silence was a grave. As aides tallied the losses, a faint tremor rippled through the ground, though no one reacted. The planet had shifted so many times that even the Earth's mourning no longer surprised them. Captain Mailer walked among them, offering nods, clasping shoulders, but saying little. Words felt too fragile for a day like this. Instead, he stood with them, letting the quiet knit their broken spirits together one heartbeat at a time. Across the plains, the loyal cities had begun to stir. Smoke uncoiled from ruined spires as servitors and labor detachments attempted to restore basic life support grids. Pilgrims emerged from makeshift shelters, carrying candles that flickered faintly against the dawn breeze. Their voices rose in fractured hymns, some pleading for mercy, others giving thanks for survival, and a few trembling with lingering fear. The hymnals wavered, out of rhythm, but together they formed something achingly human, the sound of a people trying to remember how to hope. Adriel walked among them, offering blessings without speaking, her presence alone enough to anchor their crumbling faith. Children tugged at her robe, asking if the Emperor had saved them. She hesitated before answering, forcing a smile she did not feel. "He has not forsaken us," she said softly, though her gaze drifted toward the horizon where the storm had opened. Not entirely. In the command spire, Mailer studied the final recordings from the night before. Auspex feeds, data slate logs, psychic telemetry, all captured fragments of a phenomenon the Imperium had no name for. A ripple in the warp, unlike any demon incursion, yet not wholly alien either. Something intelligent, something ancient, something that recognized humanity not as prey, but as thieves. The final Vox message played again, its layered voice still chilling even its faint distortion. "Children of the false throne, your age of ignorance ends tonight." Mailer paused the feed, staring into the frozen waveform as though it might reveal more if he simply believed hard enough. But the truth was buried deeper than any machine could reach. He felt it in his bones. They had not witnessed the beginning of a war, but the end of a lie. And perhaps the start of a truth too vast to survive. As night returned, quiet, subdued, almost tender, the officers gathered for a final council. They stood in a broken chamber illuminated only by candles, their faces carved with exhaustion and dawning comprehension. No speeches were made. No strategies proposed. Instead, they spoke of memories, fallen comrades, lost cities, promises made under brighter skies. The chaplain recited a litany for the dead, but even his voice carried a tremor of doubt. Mailer listened in heavy silence, feeling the weight of leadership shifting from burden to legacy. He realized that the story of this world would not be one of victory or defeat, but of transformation. A moment when the Imperium's unshakable certainty cracked just enough for truth to seep through. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by flickering light, he understood the greatest fear of all. Not that the enemy was coming, but that it had already passed through them. Outside, where stars bled faint light into the void, Sister Adrielle found herself gazing upward, as if seeking answers among the constellations. The night sky was serene, deceptively peaceful, offering no sign of the cosmic presence that had torn it open. She wondered whether the being had left the world or simply changed form, slipping into the warp like a thought dissolving into memory. She whispered another prayer, though she was unsure to whom she now prayed. The Emperor? The unknown? Or the silence itself? She remembered the guardsman's dying words, the Emperor crying, and felt a tremor of something that resembled grief more than fear. Faith, she realized, was not a shield. It was a wound willingly carried, and sometimes it bled. She bowed her head, letting the night wind carry her doubts away like ash caught in a faint, forgiving breeze. As the final day broke, pale and sorrowful, Mailer and Adrielle met once more at the western ridge. The planet stretched before them, scarred, grieving, yet alive. Mailer rested his hand on the hilt of his sword, not out of readiness, but reflection. Adrielle closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of dust and dawn. They spoke quietly of what must come next, the rebuilding, the reports to be sent, the truth that would be reshaped into something palatable for the wider Imperium. Histories would be written, names inscribed, lies refined into doctrine, but both knew the truth would linger beneath the official record like an echo, that something ancient had awakened, looked upon humanity, and found it wanting. They shared the silence, letting the world breathe around them. And in that silence, both wondered whether faith was truly unbreakable, or merely untested until now. In the final hours of that long and sorrowed dawn, a chronicler recorded the closing lines of the world's brief, catastrophic awakening. He wrote not of battles or casualties, but of the quiet after, the way the wind moved through burnt towers as though reading the last rites, the way survivors held one another with reverence rather than despair, the way the cracked statue of the Emperor seemed, in the half-light, to bow its head in weary understanding. He ended with a question no scripture had ever dared to ask. If humanity survives only by forgetting its truths, does it survive at all? And if the Emperor once wept, what tears remain for those who must carry on in his silence? The ink dried, the world exhaled, and history shifted. If you found this story powerful, haunting, or worthy of the Imperium's echoes, please like, subscribe, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Your support strengthens the narrative flame.